Hi, welcome to Storytime with Angel. We are back out on the sunroom, back out in the sunroom rather. It's finally warm enough. Yay, spring! Happy spring, everyone. Today we're going to have an excerpt from Elizabeth Noble. This is from her story Electric Candle. This is really interesting because it's actually from a series that's shared between authors. Elizabeth Noble and Anne Barwell are writing this series together. But they're not writing each book together. They're actually alternating books. So the first book in the series was Anne Barwell's. It was called Shades of Sepia. And then Elizabeth's came next, Electric Candle. This was last year. This year they're going to have two more books out in the series. So Anne is next, and then Elizabeth again a little bit later this year. So this is really cool that they're sharing this universe and kind of swapping back and forth in this series. So this is from Electric Candle. This is the series is the Sleepless City. The blurb that we have here says, when a vampire finds his soulmate, the bond is forever. It's love at first sight, or is it? So right there it tells us that we're doing paranormal fiction. Flint, Ohio, homicide detective Jonas Forge has been a vampire for nearly 200 years. He's fought wars, seen life go from the simple but hard colonial days to the modern high-tech world. He's evolved with the times, adapting with each new era, blending into each new life. The one constant is his best friend and lover Declan, until Forge's soulmate tumbles, literally, into his life. All right. Now Elizabeth says about the scene we're going to read that this is the scene where Forge meets his soulmate Blair for the first time. Forge is the homicide detective. He's investigating a recent murder, so he's on the crime scene. And this excerpt takes place there where Forge and Blair get off to a bit of a shaky start. So, from Electric Candle by Elizabeth Noble. This is from Dream Spinner Press. No one was there, yet Forge couldn't shake the feeling he wasn't alone. He wandered down the beach a few yards. Water splashing against the shore and spraying up made him go closer for a better look. The lake's edge here wasn't gently sloping sand, but a sharp lip of concrete. Hunkering on the ledge, Forge leaned out over for a look. The wall ran a good half-mile in either direction. He could see large spots that were darker than the surrounding area. Forge had read about the secret rooms constructed all along Lake Erie during Prohibition. Illegal booze and guns were stashed in them. One could only access the rooms by going underwater. At high tide, many of the outer parts of the rooms were completely submerged. He'd never been in one. More than likely, he'd have to get wet to justify the expense of divers. Forge was still contemplating getting a dive team in when he heard shouting, "Stop! Wait!" The voice sounded familiar, but Forge couldn't place it. It always made him nuts. Turning, he looked up at the top of the stairs. Then he squinted and shook his head. Who belonged to the voice made him stare in a type of horrified wonder, like one looked at a train wreck. The fact his cock picked then to persistently remind him of its presence and give a few twitches and throbs didn't help. It was a man, though the horror Forge was feeling might have been less if it had been a woman. He wore what appeared to be homemade steampunk goggles with dark lenses, a long-sleeved black shirt and black jeans. Sweet Mother of God, is that a cape? Forge muttered and took a few steps forward. No, stop, don't! It was too late. The oddly dressed man began to rush down the steps, the slippery, wet steps, waving his arms. He'd gone about 3 steps when his feet slid out from under him and his rear hit the stone stairs. The man yelped, and Forge's cock gave another twitch. He had the fleeting thought of how disturbing on several levels that was. What the hell? Forge ran to the bottom of the stairs. Bouncing head over heels down the steps, the guy finally flopped to one side and rolled the remainder of the way down, finishing his descent with a hearty splash in the chilly lake water. Floundering and shouting, the man slapped the lake's surface, went under, bobbed up, and spit water out of his mouth and garbled, "Can't swim." Throwing his arms wide, Forge grumbled, "It's not as if vampires drown." The guy went under. The water churned, but he didn't come to the surface. Jerking his jacket off and dropping it to the ground, Forge made sure his phone was with the garment. This has got to be a joke. A really bad joke. Forge ran to the edge and dove in. The only thing that prevented him from ejaculating the second his fingers touched the man was the cold water. He shuddered when he pulled the guy against his chest and wrapped one arm around him, using the other to help propel them to the surface. When he got to the concrete edge, he hefted the guy over and onto the ground. Forge hoisted himself out of the water and hit the guy, who looked to be in his 20s, between the shoulder blades to expel lake water. A shiver and spark of electricity ran from Forge's palm and coursed down his spine to settle in his groin. This couldn't be his soulmate. Yet even as he finished that thought, he knew, and there was no denying what his body was telling him. The fool dressed as some superhero wannabe, in a really bad outfit, was Jonah Forge's mate for eternity. Forge wondered if other vampires would penalize him for killing his soulmate. "What the hell were you thinking? And what in the holy hell are you wearing?" Forge stood, yanking his ketchup after him, shouting, "If you can't swim, what in the hell were you doing running down steps covered with algae? You know, that green slimy shit at a lake? How did you plan to get out? This isn't just any lake, it's a great lake, and it's deep. Ships sink in it." The kid clambered to his feet and held his hands up in a placating gesture. "Not to mention you're mucking up a murder investigation." Forge kept right on shouting. He waved his hands up and down for more distraction than anything, hoping the kid wouldn't notice his hard-on. Wet trousers did little to hide anything, and this guy wouldn't know being in close proximity to his soulmate was the reason behind Forge's reaction. "Look, I promise not to hurt you. Don't be scared," the kid said, and took a step back as he spoke. Forge stopped his ranting, put his hands on his hips, and stared. "You won't..." This had to be a joke. From what he could see of the kid's face, and judging by the clues given off by his body chemistry, the goof in goggles was serious. He couldn't stop the laughter that rumbled up from his belly and totally consumed him, doubling him over. "You won't hurt me?" He had to wipe the tears streaming down his face away so he could see clearly. Taking a few deep breaths only caused him to laugh more and make a very unmanly, giggling, snorting, snickering sort of sound. Forge finally got himself under control and walked across the beach to scoop his coat off the sandy ground. A few more chuckles escaped while he pulled his jacket on and extracted his badge from the inside pocket. He held it up and said, "Now let's try this again. What are you doing here? You got 5 minutes to convince me you didn't murder someone and then stand around watching when the cops showed up to examine the body." A virtual light bulb went off in Forge's brain. He didn't have to worry about what other vampires would do to him for killing his soulmate. He could just pin this murder on Goggle Boy. Either way, Declan was never, ever finding out about this. "And take those ridiculous goggles off before I shoot you for bad fashion." Forge knew very well a bullet to this kid's torso wouldn't kill him, but it would hurt like hell. The kid deserved to hurt that much for wearing a stupid get-up. I can't. The kid backed up farther. Forge took a step toward him, cocking his head to one side. He knew that voice, but from where? Names and faces started whirring through his mind. He was good at this. It was his job. For the life of him, he couldn't put a face with that voice. "Off," he growled. If he had to ask the silly boy to take the goggles off again, he was going to get the full effect of Forge in complete vamp mode. I'll be blinded, and worse, I'll ignite. I can't. You just have to accept that. Please, it's too dangerous. I don't know what will happen to you." The voice clicked in Forge's memory, and he put a name to it in disbelief. "Blair?" "I'm Alucard!" Forge stood straighter and lifted his chin, resisting the urge to burst into laughter again. "You're a vampire." If he lived another 200 years, Forge would have never seen that one coming. "When did you get those cartoon books Ben sent you?" "What? Graphic novels? And how did..." Forge shoved his police ID under Blair's nose and ground out, "When?" Blair took the ID in both hands and held it close to his face, sounding out, "Jonas Forge..." He dropped his hands and lifted his head, looking up at Forge. His heart rate sped up. The sudden change in his body chemistry sent Forge's senses reeling. Blair was feeling the physical attraction just as strongly as Forge. "I really don't want to hurt you, and it's Alucard. Alucard! Code name, remember?" The badge fluttered from Blair's hand to the sand. He garbled out some odd noise, spun, and ran. Forge sighed, bent, picked up his ID and straightened. Blair tried to run in sand with his big clunky boots and too many layers of clothes. Shaking his head, Forge mumbled, "Running? Really, it's too early for running." There was no need to hide anything now, so Forge turned on the speed and in a few seconds was in Blair's path. "It's too early for this crap, and I've only had 1 cup of coffee." He stuffed his ID back into his pocket and sneezed. "And not nearly enough antihistamines." Blair stopped so fast he kicked up a spray of sand and stumbled back. Stay away!" When Blair stood on his toes, spread his cape wide, and hissed, Forge nearly gave himself a hernia, he laughed so hard. He realized he had to get this doofus off the beach and out of the public. Blair was obviously either very confused or seriously disturbed. Forge was really hoping for confused. This kid, dressed like a character out of a bad movie and acting like he was performing in even a worse flick, was Forge's soulmate. Like it or not, that meant Forge was responsible for him. Great. Just friggin' great. All right. Well, that is Forge from Electric Candle by Elizabeth Noble. We'll have all the particulars down below for you. That was a lot of fun, and Forge sounds like a really interesting character to get to know. We will be back on Tuesday with another excerpt for you. As always, thanks for coming. Thanks for listening.